The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not those of New Zambia or its employees, but of the presenter and their respective guests. The New Zambia podcast is powered and proudly brought to you by New Zambia Media.
Hello everyone, welcome to the New Zambia podcast, and I'm your host, Wezi J Nyalazi. In today's discussion, we are going to talk about where the human right line is drawn, okay, in several circumstances or situations. And we live in a world that has been designed to have rules and regulations that act as a guideline for a specific republic or a global society. This, however, has been faced by a number of factors that render some of these rules and regulations non-functional in some societies due to various reasons. Now, in a world that has been aggressively advocating for human rights for every gender, religion, ethnicity, age group, sexual orientation, among other things, where is the human right line drawn to best suit every person or a group of people that have totally a different view from the rest? So joining me today is a very special guest, Michelle Manda, who is a former Zambia Deputy High Commissioner to Malaysia from 2010 to 2011. And before her confirmation as Deputy High Commissioner, she served as Zambia's Acting High Commissioner from 2009 to 2010, during which this period she was responsible for the first-time establishment of the Malaysia mission in Kuala Lumpur. She is fluent in English, French, Italian, and Portuguese. Now, Michelle obtained her Bachelor of Pre-Law program in Political Science from Political Science, French Language, and Literature at the State University of New York at Buffalo in the United States of America, and later got her Bachelor of Laws from the University of Zambia. She also obtained a postgraduate of Diploma in Diplomacy and International Studies from Zambia Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies, among several other things she has studied. Now, coming to her work experience, she has been in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she also served as, in addition to the Deputy High Commissioner portfolio, she also served back home as a Political Department Acting Assistant Director for European Union Affairs and Asia Pacific from 2004 to 2006. She also served as Executive Officer for the European Affairs and International Organizations, respectively, from 2003 to 2004. And she also served as Second Secretary and Executive Officer, Protocol, Consular Section, respectively, under the Zambia's High Commission to South Africa. And lastly, but not the least, she served as a bilingual assistant to the head of chancellery at the French embassy to Zambia in Lusaka. Well, this, I must say, is a very big portfolio. And before I let you speak, she is currently the Zambian representative for the International Human Rights Commission and a part-time lecturer of human rights in Paralegal Level 2 program at Cavendish University, Zambia, under the Faculty of Law. She's also a former member of a cabinet under Presidential Speech Writing Committee and has also tutored on a part-time basis in international law at the University of Zambia's School of Law. She has also served as part-time resource person for the Advanced International Human Rights Law under the Zambia Institute for Advanced Legal Education, that is YALI. And lastly, but not the least, part-time legal and business consultant specialized in legal opinions and drawing up of memoranda of understanding for the local companies under Alpha Local Service and Consultants. Wow, this is a very big portfolio, and please allow me to welcome you to the New Zambia podcast, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Wezi, for that glowing tribute. I'm so grateful and humbled, and I'm so pleased to be with you today.
Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to just have an interaction, just to get an insight on what the human right line is drawn, especially that you are coming from this field as a specialist. So now, let's just step right into it. Which human rights are currently under threat, and What is being done to preserve them?
Thank you for that question, Wezi. Very interesting. And before I answer, I would like to say that Zambia is a signatory to several human rights instruments at the international level. And therefore, and Zambia has also been recognized as being a champion and advocate for basic rights and fundamental freedoms, even at an international level. I remember very well in 2007, when the UN Human Rights Commission, as it then was being restructured into the Human Rights Council, Zambia was one of the countries which was requested to be in the lead of this transformation at the level of the United Nations, being that it was known and recognized as a staunch advocate for human rights. So at the international level, for many, many years prior to 2010, I must say that Zambia had a very good record in human rights. So we have a history of having signed and ratified all these international human rights instruments, and also playing an active role in advocating for human rights. Therefore, it follows that on the ground in the country, what we're expecting to see is that human rights must be preserved. They must be promoted and respected. But unfortunately, in the past few years, a number of human rights have been violated, basic freedoms as well. I would like today to just talk about children's rights, because I believe, of course, we all know children are the future. And when their rights are violated, we have a grim hope for what type of leaders we're trying to nurture. I think children's rights deserve attention because some of the violations have to do with their rights to survival and development, the right really to education and freedom from sexual exploitation. Basically, a child under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is anyone below the age of 18. So in our understanding, it will include youths and children. And what we mean when we say the right to survival and development is that they are not being equipped to survive under these harsh economic times, and therefore it becomes a violation of human rights. They are also not being assisted to develop. Development is not just physical growth. We need to look at a human being from all perspectives, the holistic approach. Is this person developing soft skills apart from academic skills? And there we have failed, because the children and the youths who have been rising up in our nation for the past few years have shown that they are lacking in certain survival, basic survival skills. The other right which has been lacking for children is the right to education. The right to education is a very important second generation right which appears in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This is a right in which the state must play an active role to facilitate the rights, and therefore education up to university level must be protected. And we have seen in the past that university students have been disrupted because of previous regimes' refusal to meet certain expenses, knowing very well that not all children can afford and not all parents can afford meals and so on for those children and youths who are at the university. And so the right to education has been somehow given, but then at the same time under very, very difficult conditions. So this right has not been properly attended to, and therefore it is one of the rights which require attention. Another right for children, which I think is a source of concern, is the basic freedom from sexual exploitation of children, in particular young girls. It is, I think, about 2 weeks ago when we saw a news item of young girls being held captive and detained by a private individual, using them for sexual exploitation. And this was very, very disturbing to many people in the public who watched that and saw that mothers were crying for the release of their children from this sexual slavery. It is very, very disturbing. And we are hoping that the government must put in place measures to implement the basic duties which the state has, and that is to protect and preserve these basic rights and freedoms. So I think, of course, there is a full range of human rights which are currently under threat. But I think for me as a mother, as a woman, my main concern is what are we doing about the next generation of children who are rising up in our midst and whose rights are being violated. It is a relief, and it has been a relief to learn that the New Dawn administration, under the leadership of His Excellency President Hakainde Hichilema, are speaking of the preservation of the rule of law. His pronouncements concerning governance, the first speech in Parliament was highly commendable. And there he spoke of how he would like to stand on democratic principles and preserve human rights, especially the rule of law. So with that type of political goodwill, it is hoped that the government's pronouncement towards realizing the promotion and protection of children's rights will in fact be implemented.
Okay, well, so from what you have said, so how aggressive do you think the government is when it comes to protecting these rights that are under threat?
Well, the government has a duty to preserve and protect human rights, especially where Zambia has signed and ratified international instruments. It's not that lobbyists or human rights defenders such as myself and several others need to advocate. The fact of the matter is that as soon as a government, even the previous governments under the Kaunda regime, who signed and ratified these agreements, they need to be preserved by subsequent governments. So it is not how aggressive, but we are looking forward to this implementation because of the pronouncements which have been coming out so far, very positive as they are. In the past 10 years, it is saddening to note that, in fact, the rule of law had been abandoned. And as a result, very few of the basic rights and freedoms were in fact being preserved or indeed protected. But now we have this hope that because of the political goodwill, there will be work being done. And we're looking forward to that because the president himself spoke. And so we are expecting that the Ministry of Legal Affairs and all the stakeholders will then play a very important role in ensuring that human rights are protected in Zambia.
Okay, thank you. Now, what challenges have we faced as a nation in balancing the fight against the pandemic and preservation of certain rights? How can we compare the infringement numbers now and the time before COVID had started?
Well, the coronavirus pandemic has brought a number of challenges globally. It's not only Zambia which has been affected, but several countries around the world. And in countries, the manner in which the government addresses this particular pandemic has in fact determined in public opinion whether such a government is popular or not. So it's highly relevant and very important to understand how human rights are being preserved during this time of the pandemic. In Zambia, we are fortunate in that the Ministry of Health has been consistent in fighting the pandemic from inception. And we've had a number of challenges which have been handled, such as the myths associated with the pandemic and need for vaccination. But in all this, the state is under a duty to provide healthcare to its citizens, and this is being done through vaccination. And so it's very, very important that individuals accept to be vaccinated because this will help them to fight the coronavirus. We must remember that it is a virus, like other viruses which have swept through our country. It is a virus. And therefore, it needs to be contained, and actually, as a virus, it needs to be destroyed. So something we need to also understand is that certain basic rights and freedoms have limitations. We all know that human rights are not absolute, in the sense that my human rights will end where your human rights begin. So therefore, what it means is that the state has a duty even if there was, even in this situation of a health pandemic, or if there was a war situation, the state has a duty to impose certain restrictions in terms of the enjoyment of basic rights and fundamental freedoms. And that restriction should only last for the duration of this pandemic or emergency situation that we're facing. So, for example, the fact that we can only gather in groups of less than 50 people, either at a wedding or funeral, that really needs to be adhered to. It needs to be adhered to. It is only for this period. And once the pandemic is over, we can revert to our usual norms, which we do, our cultural beliefs and so on. But for now, a wedding, a funeral, or any type of ceremony can only be restricted to a certain number of people. Equally, our movements in and out of the country, we need to be tested. And once tested negative, then we can embark on an international journey. Currently, Zambia, it was on the red list, I think in the UK, but we've been removed. Yes. But now with Omicron, with Omicron, I'm not sure where we are. But the most important thing we should do is to follow and comply with the requirements under the World Health Organization, as well as the Ministry of Health. And our Minister of Health, Honorable Sylvia Masebo, has been very, very active in engaging the public, in updating us, and in letting us know what the government is doing. So I think some of the challenges are fighting these myths which exist, saying that if you take a vaccination, you're going to die within 2 years. Or if you take a vaccination, they're trying to track you. You know, the conspiracy theories and things like that. That is, I think, the biggest challenge towards combating this COVID-19.
Okay. Now, we've seen I personally have seen some situations where I would say the public transport sector is where we have much of a problem, I think. That's just my opinion, because I've actually observed quite a number of situations where you get to see people, passengers that are not masked up, and the drivers are not doing anything to help in curbing this virus. So how can the state, through its different various wings, enforce? How can it enforce measures without violating these people's rights?
So moving in a public transport, such as a taxi, a bus, or an airplane, require compliance to the basic COVID prevention measures. And these are hand washing, wearing a mask, sanitization, and and coughing within your elbow and so on. It is very disheartening to learn that some bus drivers are actually packing so many passengers within their buses for the sake of financial gain. And also that when traveling, even in taxis and so on, sometimes there's no sanitizer. It's actually for the benefit of the passenger and the driver to protect ourselves, because unfortunately, this particular virus is quite contagious. And once you get it, it's very, very unpredictable. It's a virus, and so it spreads quickly, and it's quite dangerous, especially for those who are not vaccinated. So the unvaccinated individuals, I would say to you, please get vaccinated. For those who are vaccinated, I would say, now that there's Omicron, please go for your booster shot so that you have that extra protection, which you have. The government can regulate and has been regulating what happens in a public space in terms of wearing a mask, sanitizing, hand washing, keeping a distance of more than 1 meter, and coughing in your elbow. And if you notice that you have symptoms, then you really need to self-isolate. And this has been in the public domain for a very long time. So the members of the public really need to comply with these requirements so that we can reduce the rates of transmission in the shortest possible period.
Okay, so now, do you think there are some, God forbid, if this virus, because we are now almost, we are now 2 years into this pandemic. So do you think if it prolonged, okay, do you think that there's some rights, human rights, that will be completely be lost along the way?
It's possible that freedom of movement might be affected already when there are lockdowns. Automatically, that is a restriction on your freedom of movement, because you would have wanted to go here and there, but now you cannot because there's this lockdown. In Zambia, the past 1 year and a half, we have not really had as much a severe lockdown as it has been in Europe, where the numbers were extremely high. So we can say that our human rights have not been violated to that extent. But in other countries in Europe, and even in South Africa, where the numbers were extremely high, it was very difficult to even move out of your own personal home to go to the supermarket. And one would only go if there was a serious necessity. It was impossible to have the type of movements we're seeing in our markets and in our high density areas. So the government has been cautious, but I think there's more that can be done, especially in the high density areas, in the markets. I believe there's need to hand out these masks for free. I don't think that we are now in a stage where we should be making people buy a face mask. I think face masks, I'm sure WHO can find a way of reducing the price or subsidizing substantially so that we have that. But in terms of violating human rights, it's not that the government would want to violate them. But as I said earlier, the government has a duty to impose restrictions in the time of emergency. So as of now, we're going through a pandemic. This gives the state an obligation to protect its citizens by limiting certain rights. And that limitation should only be for a certain period. And then thereafter, we should be allowed to go back to our normal life. So the main violation would be freedom of movement. Yes, you cannot move around anyhow. Freedom of assembly. You can assemble, but the numbers again are limited. So that is really where some of these rights would be restricted, but it's for the preservation of national safety and also for health reasons. It's not really a violation of human rights as such.
Okay. Now, still on the COVID-19, we have this debate, okay? The debate on the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. So here's a group, the vaccinated say they want to work or learn in a safe environment because it is their right. And then on the other hand, we have got the unvaccinated who say, I cannot get vaccinated because it is also my right to choose whether I want to get vaccinated or not. So how does that debate, what do you think is the way to go on this debate? How to handle it? How can we handle it?
Well, you know, as with all medical conditions, individuals have the right to choose and to decide what they're going to do with themselves in order to preserve and protect their bodies and their health. So indeed, those who do not want to vaccinate because they are a bit skeptical or because they just feel that they can't, some on religious grounds have never taken any vaccination. I have in mind many of Jehovah's Witnesses who refuse to take vaccinations and blood transmission and so on. So possibly on cultural or religious grounds, there are some who might not want to be vaccinated, and they do have that right. In fact, the International Human Rights Commission does concur that there are some individuals who must enjoy that right to choose whether to be vaccinated or not, because they might feel that whether you're vaccinated or not, the vaccine is not really 100% effective. And there are some studies which are now showing that even those who have had a COVID vaccination have succumbed to COVID. Yes. And others have even appeared on BBC talking about it, that they got the first and the second vaccine, but actually, eventually they got coronavirus itself and were quite critically ill. So individuals have the right to decide whether they want to be vaccinated or not. However, I do believe, and the WHO, the Ministry of Health, is saying that it is better to be vaccinated in any disease, even cholera. You are better off having the vaccination because that in itself will give you the antibodies necessary to fight this disease. Without a vaccination, you're actually quite vulnerable. You're vulnerable unless you're saying that you have not had any vaccination and therefore your own body has had a very, very strong immune system in which it will fight out any infection or virus. So that's up to the individual concerned. But if there is a policy stipulating that we must be vaccinated, such as there is now, that even children are being encouraged, those between the age of 12 to 18 are being encouraged to be vaccinated. So it is, again, a personal decision. However, from a medical perspective, and indeed even from a human rights perspective, it is better to have that extra protection so that should you be in an environment where there's a coronavirus, your body at least will be able to fight it out.
Okay. All right. Now, where do you think the employer-employee human rights line are drawn? Because, I mean, each and every organization, each and every workplace has got their own regulations. They've got their own code of conduct. They've got, they've got the ways and means. They've got ways of running their businesses and all. So, do you think can employers impose vaccine on their employees, and are employers allowed to ask for vaccinations as a prerequisite or a verification of being vaccinated as a prerequisite to work for their institution? Because this question is coming from a place where I've interacted with quite a number of people that have been in such situations where employers have told them, no, you cannot work with us unless you provide us the proof of vaccination. So where is that line drawn?
Yes, this is also quite a sensitive topic, similar to a requirement by some organizations that employees, before you travel, I remember there was a time where in the Middle East, if you wanted to travel for employment, there was a requirement to have an HIV test. And a lot of people felt that that was an infringement of their human rights because in any case, they would not transmit such a disease. It's not contagious. It's something which is only sexually transmitted. Similarly, an employer requiring an employee to do a COVID test, again, because of the fact that individuals have the right to choose whether they're going to be vaccinated or not, it becomes difficult for an employer to impose this type of requirement that before you come to work in this organization, you must be vaccinated. Rather, the approach which employers must take is to protect the workspace by enforcing the 5 golden rules which exist. That is providing for face masks, hand washing and sanitizers, social distance, disinfecting the workspace, and ensuring that those who have a cough or anything are actually taking good care not to cough in the presence of others. So I think with when we take care of sanitizing the workspace, social distancing, face masks, it really won't matter whether a person has been tested or not, unless an individual is visibly portraying signs and symptoms of COVID itself, in which case it becomes a danger for the rest of the team at work. So then, yes, the employer would then be able to compel an employer to go for a test so that they can protect the rest of the team. There's a concept which those in the medical field are referring to as herd vaccination, where they're saying that populations should consider themselves like a herd of livestock, whereby if one of the livestock is diseased, then that should be removed from the herd and isolated for the preservation of the rest. It's similar with coronavirus, that if one has coronavirus, of course, the first thing is to isolate that person until they recover, so that the rest of the people are not infected. But simply to go to work, I think it is the duty of the employer to ensure that masks and other protective measures are in place. And in fact, most human rights organizations, including International Human Rights Commission, are of the view that it is the employer's duty to enforce measures to prevent the spread of coronavirus and any other contagious disease, rather than compelling an employee to go for a test and a vaccination itself, unless there is a feeling or a view that such an employee might be exhibiting symptoms of coronavirus or any other contagious disease for that matter.
Okay. Well, still home back here in Zambia, particular, why are some people still subjected to the death sentence? And why have activists and NGOs not advocated for its removal from our books? And what needs to be changed or maintained for us to handle this issue?
Well, thank you for this question on capital punishment. It is a question which is debated or has been debated for many years and in many countries around the world for a very long time. Should we have capital punishment, the death penalty, and so on, or not? And what is the purpose of imprisonment? What is the purpose of rehabilitation? In Zambia, the death penalty exists. Actually, it is provided for. This is for the most serious crimes. And it exists under Section 25 of the Penal Code, which is Chapter 87 of the laws of Zambia. So it does provide that there is death penalty, and that is for the most serious crimes. When we talk of most serious crimes here, we're looking at murder, treason, any other felony, which is a very serious crime. Some of them do carry a maximum penalty of the death sentence. And in fact, in Zambia, it does exist. We do have an executioner. Everything is in place. However, the Zambian Human Rights Commission and several NGOs have been lobbying for many, many years. And they've been lobbying each and every government from practically the time of independence, that although we have inherited this death penalty, that we need to now begin to sign some of the international protocols which abolish the death penalty. The international protocol in particular is the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, aiming at the abolition of the death penalty. And this was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1989. It's a resolution, in fact, Resolution 44/1238, which a resolution at the UN General Assembly is similar to an act of parliament at domestic level. So Article 1 stipulates that no one within the jurisdiction of a state party to the present protocol shall be executed, meaning that no one who is a member of the United Nations and who is party to this agreement should be practicing the death penalty in their country. The other provision is that Article 2 is that every state party, meaning every signatory, shall take all necessary measures to abolish the death penalty within its jurisdiction, meaning that those who are state parties to this protocol must actually abolish it. What you might want to know is whether Zambia has signed this protocol or not. Yes. And the truth is, that Zambia, in fact, has not signed the protocol. And this is despite the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, Zambia has been a champion for democracy and human rights and for many years, and has been recognized for advocating for human rights, the rule of law. I'm sure you'll remember during the time or the tenure of President Mwanawasa, that is one thing that he used to talk about all the time, transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. And it is now being repeated by President Hakainde Hichilema, who also says he's standing on a strong foundation of preservation of the rule of law and human rights and democratic principles. So if this is our core belief, then we are looking forward and hoping that the new Dawn administration would be able to now take steps to remove this provision from our statute books.
So, don't you think we are being hypocritical as a country? Because we have this image, right, on just like you have alluded to, on the international level, where we have yes, we have got this good image when it comes to human rights and democracy and everything, but this area specifically is still not being attended to, and neither all these regimes have they ever signed the document that needs to be signed for them to abolish it.
It is a cause for concern because yes, even the governments which were very much advocating for democracy and human rights did not actually sign this, reasons best known to themselves. But I think we have a glimmer of hope now with the new government, and possibly as well, it's up to us, the stakeholders, the NGOs who are advocating for some of these rights, to actually lobby Parliament, lobby our MPs, so that something can be changed, because these documents are ratified. The decision to ratify an international document is made in Parliament. So again, it's up to us as human rights defenders, it's up to the journalists, it's up to those who are in the area, you know, the stakeholders, to really lobby government and continue without relenting that we do need this provision to be removed. It is not a good thing to have a death penalty. You know, death is so final. And when you watch in other jurisdictions, such as the United States of America, where they regularly enforce the death penalty, either by lethal injection or by electrocution or by other means, so many cases have been publicized where they now find 10 or 20 years later that in fact that person who was accused never indeed did commit that offense. And it's difficult now to do anything because death is so final. You cannot bring back that person. Whereas if it was life imprisonment, at least the person could have been acquitted and released or pardoned or something. So I believe personally that this provision should be removed from our books, not only because it's so final, but because Zambia is a state party to the United Nations protocol, to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, among other international instruments.
Okay, so do you think even we have this common police special unit called the C5, do you think these also fall under the same category? Because I mean, we've heard of situations where we've heard of situations where we hear, okay, these guys have gunned down suspected, alleged. Obviously, it's always about suspects, and then when we take it to the justice system, we're talking about someone not being guilty until proven, being innocent until proven guilty. So, what stance do you think, or approach do you think should be taken on how these guys can handle this situation as the Commission, International Human Rights Commission?
Well, the police have their own way of handling crime. And I want to believe that the C5 are only brought into a situation when it's a very critical situation, which is a threat to the public and also a danger to the community, as well as even sometimes a threat even to themselves as an individual. So in trying to quell a very delicate situation, which could be extremely harmful if not managed well, I think they do use force. They're using force to protect us as citizens, and they're using force to actually stop that person from committing further crimes. So I think they're justified in the movements that they're making. However, sometimes you find that it's also slanted. There's a political slant maybe to what they're doing, which is wrong. It's not entirely a criminal act. The C5 and events where they're going on hard to press onto an individual, I believe were intended to stop hardcore criminals in the community who might be on a rampage, going out there, destroying property, killing people, and disturbing the peace of the public. In that case, yes, they're justified in trying to prevent further harm to the public. But where there's that political slant, individuals are being targeted and so on, then it becomes a bit questionable as to whether the force used is justifiable and whether the force used was appropriate or whether it was so overwhelming, and so many other questions. So I wouldn't want to dwell much on the C5 because I'm not sure of their mandate and terms of reference. I believe it would depend on the context as well, the situation, and that there are specific, those are specialized, it's a specialized unit which is only used in extremely dangerous situations. So I am not very sure about their terms of reference, but I think they must, any person, any agent of the state which is going about their duties must ensure that the force used is appropriate to the situation and that they are not using overwhelming force in trying to manage a situation.
Okay, thank you. Now, how absolute, according to the Commission, how absolute are these human rights? The human rights, how absolute are they?
As I mentioned earlier, human rights are not absolute because, mind you, even freedom of expression, for example, is not absolute. One cannot go about town discussing everything and anything about another fellow human being because every human being must enjoy their right to privacy. Again, they must enjoy their dignity as a human being. So anyone cannot just carelessly, randomly, without due consideration, begin to utter statements which may injure the right to privacy of another individual. At law, it will become a tort of defamation at that point, whereby you are now scandalizing or bringing into ridicule a person when in fact they're supposed to enjoy their dignity as a human being among their peers in society, live in enjoying their right to privacy, knowing very well that whatever is private should remain private. So it is not right, it is not correct to say that human rights are absolute because they are actually not. Human rights are limited and are to be enjoyed, taking into account the fact that we're living in a society where each and every individual is expected to enjoy their basic rights. So whereas I may enjoy my freedom of expression, you also have to enjoy your right to privacy. And this is the reason why we always say that human rights are interdependent. They're actually interrelated and they're connected. You cannot say that I'm going to absolutely enjoy all my rights and deny your neighbor his rights. In that case, we are not talking of human rights anymore. So human rights are interdependent, interconnected, interrelated. One right can affect another right, or group rights indeed. So we must be very careful. Awareness, as we are doing today, and so important to talk about these human rights because many people don't actually know what we mean when we're talking about human rights. So it's very important that we discuss this even in local languages. What exactly do we mean? This is why the 2016 referendum to extend human rights actually failed. It's because people didn't understand what was meant by human rights. When you say human rights, others were talking about issues which were totally unrelated. So now that President Hakainde Hichilema has made it a point that yes, the constitutional provision for human rights will be extended, we are watching and looking forward in great anticipation to see that indeed the second generation of rights should be included in the Constitution. And this is where we talk of the right to adequate housing, the right to a good nutrition, the right to healthcare, rights under the second generation of rights, which need to be addressed and included in the Constitution once it is agreed that they'll be extended. And of course, you know that when ending a Constitution, it can't just be done by one person. There must be either a referendum or a conference of some sort. You know, all these constitutional commissions we've had in the past must be constituted so that the stakeholders and all citizens contribute and have a role to play in which rights should be included to the Bill of Rights.
Okay, thank you. Now let's jump to the Public Order Act. Okay, the Public Order Act obviously has been one of the hot topics that the country has been, talking about. So, the Public Order Act is. Do you think the Public Order Act is unconstitutional? Because when you look at the Bill of Rights, it clearly states under these articles 37, the right to participate in political activities. Then we also have Article 38 that says right to freedom of association. And lastly, Article 39 that says right to assemble and picket.
So yes, thank you for that question. The Public Order Act, again, is another important statute which has been debated for several years. And the debate has been whether in fact this is good law or not, whether it ought to remain on the statute books or not. But basically the intention was good and noble, and that is to regulate some of these assemblies, because of course, as you have rightly pointed out, freedom of assembly is provided for in the Constitution, and public order and safety, when there are special events and in public spaces, must be preserved. But there has been a lot of criticism over the Public Order Act because it would appear that it has been used to rather than preserve public order and peace, has been used in fact to oppress as an instrument of oppression against those who are in the opposition and so on for many years. So this Public Order Act, which in fact is quite an old act, has been an instrument of oppression. And even where those are having public gatherings and peaceful marches, they have been denied even a permit due to the act. There's been a lot said and discussed about the act, mainly that it has had a very negative impact on democracy in Zambia, and that the enjoyment of fundamental freedoms has been affected because of its existence, that the police have been abusing this act, and that there's been a lot which has been denied to individuals in Zambia due to this act. So though the intention was good, it is the abuse of the act which is despised, and because of that, it is felt that this act must be done away with, that it is not good law, and that in fact, if it is a question of regulating public gatherings, that can be done in a different way. Personally, I agree. And, it is one of those, as we go towards democracy, I believe it is one of those statutes which really needs to be done away with. Yeah. So, yes, it has been, a subject of debate. And unfortunately, in the past, there are several examples which we can use to show that it does undermine the rule of law. It does threaten Zambia's young democracy, and it has been historically characterized by conflict and other human rights abuses. So this act, I think, the pretext of trying to preserve public order and so on, in fact, has not been the case. In reality, basic rights, fundamental freedoms have been totally abused. There's been a lot of oppression in the name of enforcing the Public Order Act. So I do not think it is good law. I believe that if we are to comply with the Constitution, especially Article 1, Sub-Article 3, which states that the Constitution is the highest law of the land, any other law which contradicts the Constitution is therefore null and void, then therefore all the criticism and all the constructive debate which has been there should be a way of moving away from having such a repressive act. The Constitution provides for fundamental freedoms and basic rights. Therefore, why should there be a law or an act which is doing quite the contrary?
Okay, interesting. Now, before we close, what strategies do you think have proven to be fruitful in executing the Commission's duty?
The International Human Rights Commission is affiliated to the United Nations Human Rights Council. Some of the strategies that we have are monitoring the human rights pattern, in my case, in particular in Zambia. My colleagues in other countries do the same where they are. So I think monitoring the rate at which human rights is being complied with or is being protected and preserved, that is something that we do in a very passive manner. Monitoring means you merely observe and check on the rate at which the leaders' pronouncements are in favor or not in favor of the protection and preservation of human rights, the respect of human rights, whether indeed they are fulfilling their roles under the international instruments or not. And once we have an idea of what is going on the ground, then of course, we recommend to the United Nations as one of the stakeholders or submit our views to UN Human Rights Council as to the status of that particular state party. Okay. So really monitoring, yes, monitoring. The other one, which is more active, is where we have workshops, training in various human rights topics. And we've been trying to begin. I think we'll be working with one of the universities within Zambia to try and see if we can introduce very short-term programs to create awareness in various sectors of what is human rights, what do we mean, and what is the role of the state, and what are the duties of individuals. We must bear in mind that individuals are not just beneficiaries, but also do have certain duties. And so we need to educate ourselves and the public in general as to what some of those duties might be. We also, during time of elections, such as the general election we had in August, we also, although we didn't this time, but we also would like in the future to be able to train the voting public and even the candidates themselves in how to conduct themselves as they go about seeking votes from the general public, both in the rural and urban areas. So it's quite an interesting mandate to see how we can promote human rights through training, advocacy, and through general observation of where we are going. And the whole point of this exercise is to make sure at the end of the day that individuals around the world are enjoying their basic rights and that states are made conscious of their responsibilities towards the populations that they govern.
Okay, thank you. Now, in conclusion, what are the Commission's international, of course, commendations and recommendations on the Zambian landscape?
Well, there was some concern from about 2020, I would say from 2016 until, I suppose, last year. There was a huge concern about the deterioration of human rights in Zambia. And when I got nominated for this position in 2018, one of the things which they said to me was they're not happy. The international community was not really happy with the status of affairs and wanted to just see how Zambia could be helped to move forward. And so the idea is to see, not just to condemn where governments are failing, but to see how they can be helped. And thankfully, for now, the New Dawn administration, which was elected last August, has shown their goodwill in terms of regaining that international status which Zambia had and which we lost through the implementation of various measures, not only pronouncements and policies, but actual measures, tangible measures which will be put in place by the government to ensure that not only civil and political rights are preserved, but also the economic, social, and cultural rights, which are very, very important. As I mentioned earlier, human rights are enjoyed interchangeably. You can't just say you should have freedom of assembly and then you not have an adequate house, because by not having adequate housing, you might be the one wanting to go and in an assembly to protest. So, this is why it's so interlinked. We must ensure really that the state preserves and protects and promotes respect, and even where possible, puts in place tangible mechanisms, tangible and visible means of preserving and respecting human rights.
All right, thank you. So in closing, what are your last words?
My last words are, as I mentioned, I would like to go back to my first point where I said children's rights are very important. My concern and what I would like to say finally is that we need to focus on not only helping the youth to find their foothold in society, we also need to assist the elderly and those who have played a very important role in bringing this country to where it is. So there's a full spectrum of rights which need to be preserved. We need to bear in mind all of those rights. It's not only the right to life, the right to children's rights, women's rights. There are also rights to work, rights to join a trade union, rights of leisure. It's very important that leisure and sport should not be undermined. They are equally important. A youth should be allowed to be involved in sports for free, should be encouraged to join sports clubs, because by doing that, we're keeping youths off the streets. They'll not be abused by unscrupulous politicians who want to gain political mileage by using the youth. So our eyes and focus must be on the youth and children, that their survival and development must be preserved at all costs, so that as they rise up and as they grow in society, there will be law-abiding citizens who will be able to take Zambia from where we are to the next level. And also, we would like to preserve the dignity of those senior citizens who have already served. They've already done everything they can for this nation, by giving them their rights, their benefits, allowing them to enjoy their pension as they should, giving them their place in society. Even a small thing like saying senior citizens should ride the buses free of charge, or senior citizens should be first in the queue in the bank. It might sound small, but it is a way of showing respect and dignity to these people who have already played a very important role. So for me, I would say that yes, human rights exist. There is a huge, vast, full spectrum of human rights. Let us not just focus on one or two things like freedom of worship and freedom of expression, but let's consider each and every basic right and freedom which is important in the life of a human being and in the health of a society and a community, whether that community is in the urban areas or in the rural areas or in the peri-urban areas. Let us preserve human rights and let people also get to know exactly what are these rights we're talking about.
Okay, great. Wow. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been a privilege having you here. I believe that someone out there has learned something and they'll keep on learning something. Thank you so much. And
thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I'm grateful that I was able to share this information.
Thank you.